And now we're going to go to Germany to meet Britta Winterberg, and we've been keeping Britta waiting a little while as well, so we apologise for that. Britta, we have been negligent. We should have had much more coverage of novel food, of new food, because here in Ireland, the greatest emission is from agriculture. Our greatest greenhouse emissions gases are emissions from agriculture. And we have increased, for example, our ammonia emissions by 80% in 10 years. So we have a lot of work to do in this area. And we're not as cutting edge as you are, but you're in cultivated dairy. You're going to, and you'll have to send us some samples, Britta, when you move into food production. But you're making cheese from plants and you're making dairy products from plants. So that also is very ambitious. So thank you for making sure that we feature food and alternatives and humane alternatives and alternatives in terms of food which are kind to the planet. So I hand over to Britta Winterberg of Formo, formerly Legion Dairy. There's a story about that we'll go into another time. But Britta, guten Abend. Great to see you. The floor is yours. Britta Winterberg, CEO and founder of Formo.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today and to be able to present how Formo wants to revolutionize the food sector. Oh, and now I can't go to the next slide. Here we go. So we all know that the world's population is growing exponentially. So in the 1950s, we were just over 2 billion people on this planet. And the projections predict that in 2050, so in just 30 years' time, we will have almost 10 billion people. And the problem is that all these people need to be fed. So we believe that there will be an increased demand for protein in just 30 years' time. And in just a few years' time, so in the year 2025, we will see an increased demand by 50% for milk products. The problem with that is that livestock farming is a major contributor to greenhouse gas emission, and cattle is emitting a staggering amount of CO2 equivalents, so about 5,000 million tons of CO2 equivalents every year. Pork and poultry are, way back on second place for that. So this is obviously a huge problem since we already face climate change. So this awareness has settled in over the last couple of years. So we see more and more customers becoming aware of the problem of dairy farming, and they are starting to buy alternative dairy products. The reason for that, there are different reasons why customers switch to alternative dairy products. One reason is sustainability. So dairy farming emits about 4% of all greenhouse gas emissions. So initially you think, 4%, that's not so much, but it's actually more than all the global shipping and aviation industry together. So that's mind-blowing than the number. Also, dairy farming is responsible for cattle farming is responsible for about 30% of biodiversity loss. There's also a health aspect to switching to alternative dairy products. Around 80% of all antibiotics are used in industrial livestock farming, and there will be residuals of that in the produce that we consume. Dairy products have a high level of cholesterol, and also not named here, they're not suitable for people who, for example, can't digest lactose. Another important aspect is animal welfare. In industrial settings of farming, the lifespan of mother cows is reduced by 75%. And also male calves are of no use for dairy farmers, so they get culled. So the pandemic, as disruptive as it has been, it has also increased consumer awareness. So in the US, 80% of alternative protein buyers purchased their first plant-based product ever. So over the last 18 months, suddenly there was like an increase of people who were interested in plant-based protein products. And 92% of those first-time buyers report that they will continue to buy those products. We see very similar figures in Europe, where 80% of consumers state that they are likely to continue eating plant-based alternatives, even when the pandemic is over. And I see that in my own fridge as well. 3 or 4 years ago, you would not have found a lot of plant-based products in there, apart from maybe margarine. But now, if you look into my fridge, you will find oat milk, for example, or you will find burgers, plant-based burgers, for example. And so the awareness has increased over the last 1.5 years, especially. The problem with that is that we are all bound by traditions and habit. For me, for example, New Year's Eve is always cheese fondue. And so this is a tradition that is really difficult to break for me, because this brings my family together around the table. We enjoy this very special meal once a year. So that means that it's really difficult to change to a plant-based diet. So that's why each of us consumes an average of 110 kilograms of dairy products each year. And plant-based products don't really offer an alternative. When it comes to plant-based milks, let's say oat, soy, almond, and so on, these are actually performing quite well. But when you look at cheese, there's not really a plant-based cheese available that will melt nicely on a pizza, that will taste delicious, that can substitute mozzarella or Gruyere or any kind of cheese. So that's why it's so difficult to break this habit of buying traditional dairy products. And that's what Formo wants to change. So we produce real dairy products, but without the cows. And these products will have the same texture, taste, and functionality as normal dairy products. So here you see two of our dishes that we produced over the last couple of months. So this is a ricotta-based dish that we created. And so how do we do that? So instead of domesticating mammals, cows, for example, we domesticate microorganisms. So what we do is a process called precision fermentation. So we grow microorganisms in huge steel tanks, similar to beer brewing, but we don't get alcohol, we get protein. And then we can extract this protein, the milk proteins, and we can blend them together with plant-based fats, and then produce traditional dairy products from it: cheese, yogurt, ice cream, any kind of dairy product you can imagine. And then we can just distribute that to the customers. In contrast to that, traditional dairy products, for that you need a long line of steps. So you need to breed the cows, you need to raise them, you need to inseminate so that they can produce calves, and then you start milking the cows. So in our case, using precision fermentation, we can cut out the middle cow or the middleman and have a much faster and more sustainable process. So, and with that, we use 98% less water, 91% less land, 84% less energy, and we emit 65% less greenhouse gases. And when you think about it, using biotechnology in food is actually not such a big step. So, because we are at the verge of the 5th industrial revolution. So about 200 years ago, steam power changed how we work, how we produce, how we move. And then about 100 years ago, electricity changed changed absolutely everything in our life, I would say. Then 20 years ago, the internet became more widespread. So this allowed us to access information faster, to communicate in a completely different way. And over the last couple of years, this has developed even further with cloud technology. And that actually enables us to be here together today, like all across the globe, and still enjoying a conference together. So the next revolution that we will see is biotechnology. And we are just that, like we are really close to this. We are at the verge of this revolution. So biotechnology is the magic ingredient that we need to tackle a lot of the problems that we are facing right now. So biotechnology in food production is actually not that new. So in the early 80s, a company called Genentech was the first company that used biotechnology to produce a biopharmaceutical. So in that case, it was insulin. Insulin is used to regulate the blood sugar levels. And traditionally, it was harvested from the pancreases of pigs and cattle. And so then Genentech developed a completely new process using biotechnology, and they extracted superior human insulin. So not the cattle or pig insulin, but actually the human insulin that was produced by bacteria or yeast. And so today, these dominate the market. So you will hardly find any insulin on the market that is still produced with a traditional approach. Then in the 1990s, Pfizer developed food additives that were produced through biotechnology. The first one was chymosin, that is used during the cheese making process. So it's actually the enzyme that causes the milk to coagulate and then to form the cheese curd. So initially or traditionally, this was isolated from the stomach of calves. And today, 90% of the rennet used worldwide is actually of microbial origin. So you will have a hard time to find any cheese in a supermarket that doesn't use biotechnology during its process. And so today, Formo takes it a step further. So in the year 2024, we want to enter the market with dairy products where the protein, so the main ingredient, is produced through biotechnology. So we express the dairy proteins not in cows' udders, but we actually use microorganisms for that. And thereby we can create real dairy proteins through sustainable fermentation, precision fermentation. So what is actually in milk? Milk is mainly water, a bit of carbohydrates, a tiny bit of fat, then about 3% proteins, and the rest is minerals and ash. So of these proteins, 80% are what's called the so-called caseins. There are 4 different caseins called alpha S1, alpha S2, beta, and kappa casein. And then there's the so-called whey proteins. Alpha-lactalbumin and beta-lactoglobulin are the major components there, and then a few smaller fractions of proteins. So we focus on the caseins and on the whey proteins in milk. So how do we actually do that? So in order to express them in microorganisms, so to produce them in microorganisms through fermentation, what we need to do is to look at DNA sequences of cows. Luckily, the cow genome has been sequenced already many years ago, so it was very easy to identify the genes that are responsible for the production of milk in cows. We then take this bit of DNA, we get it synthesized, and then we use that to transform yeast or bacteria or other fungi. So we just give them all the genetic information that is needed to produce the proteins. We then isolate the right strains that are capable to do that, and then we ferment them. So we grow them in like perfect conditions. So we have just like a large steel tank, for example, and all the microorganisms get all the nutrients, the oxygen, like anything they desire. We keep them like very happy in our fermenters, and then they start producing the milk proteins. We can extract those, and then we can blend them with other plant-based ingredients and use them in very traditional processes to make any kind of dairy product. So this is just to give you an idea of like what is actually needed, like all the different steps that we need to go through. So what you see here on the very left is a small petri dish where we grow our, in this case, it's a yeast. So we generate thousands of these little tiny colonies. Then we screen them in small volumes. So hundreds of them will have to go through a screen where we say like, okay, this strain does produce a bit of the protein. Then we scale that up to shake flask still in a lab. We start the fermentation screening where we keep them in fermenters, and only a few, or maybe only one of them, of the thousands that we start with, will actually go into an industrial scale to produce the dairy proteins. So, but from there, this is not actually the end. So the protein production is only the start. From there, we need to blend it into something that's not really milk, but has all the functional ingredients of milk, so the proteins that we desire and also the fats. And then we need to test the dairy products that we produce from here. So what you can see on the right is actually like a little instrument that we've got in our lab. So here we test the stretchiness of mozzarella, because it's actually the caseins in milk that give cheese its stretchiness, so it can melt, it can be stretched. And unfortunately, this is not, any kind of this proteins is not available in plants. So that's why plant-based products like cheese products will never be able to melt or to stretch, because it's actually a very distinct function of the caseins that is only found in mammals. So the beauty about using precision fermentation to produce dairy products compared to, let's say, like alternative meat products is when you want to make, let's say, meat, pork or chicken or beef, for example, like for every single product, for any kind of mammal that you want to replicate, let's say you want to make a burger patty from lab-grown meat, you always need to start with a new cell line. So you need to develop the entire process to grow those cells in the lab and to scale this up to industrial scale. So this is a very lengthy process. And you can't easily switch from seafood to beef because you always need to adapt and to optimize your process. In our case, we start with a very limited number of microbial strains, and we can produce any kind of dairy product. And lucky for us, there's only a handful or less than a dozen of companies doing that right now, whereas there's a lot more companies already interested in the alternative meat sector. So the next question then that we ask is like, we can produce amazing dairy products, but are customers and consumers actually interested in those dairy products? Are they actually happy to buy, to taste, and to try those products? So we did a consumer study that was just published a couple of days ago, where we asked more than 5,000 different customers or consumers in 5 different countries, so ranging from Brazil, Germany, India to the UK and the US. And what we saw was an overwhelming response. So more than 70% of the consumers worldwide were willing to try and to buy our cultured dairy products. And we were very open about the technology we use. So we told very openly that we use biotechnology and that we are blending biotechnology and traditional food production to create our dairy products. And more than 75% of the customers were willing to try, and more than 70% of the consumers were willing to buy cultured dairy. And they are also willing to pay a price premium for that because they value the sustainability of our products and the animal welfare that our products bring and the health benefits, because our products will be free of hormones and antibiotics. And they are also lactose free, which means suddenly a cheese becomes available for example, the vast majority of the Asian population that usually can't digest lactose. So our dairy products are in line with several of the sustainability development goals. So our products are just as nutritious as the traditional dairy products. They are as functional and they're customizable. So for different consumer groups, we can customize the products to bring additional health benefits. Our products are free of cholesterol, hormones, and antibiotics. They use less water, less energy, less land, and they by far produce less greenhouse gas emissions than cattle farming. They are also replicable, which means that we can produce wherever the consumer is. So we don't need to have like one large factory worldwide, but we can have smaller factories wherever our products are used or needed, which means there's less transport involved, which also contributes to the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. We can produce regional and we can produce in a circular way. So we produce less waste, for example. So yeah, with this, I hope I could give you a taste of the future. So FORMO is trying to revolutionize how we consume dairy products, how we produce them, and how we consume them. So FORMO is the future of dairy. With that, I would already like to thank you for listening. And yeah, I'm looking forward to some questions.
Britta, thank you very much for that presentation. We're not going to hold you too long, but we have no doubt that you will revolutionize dairy products. And we have seen the huge growth of impossible foods, of beyond meat. You're in a space which there aren't as many people, but here in this country we love cheese. So we consider ourselves connoisseurs of cheese. So will your products? How long will it be before your products can be bought? How long before they can be served in a restaurant when restaurants reopen?
Yeah, it's actually not too far away. So we are planning to enter the market in 2023. So depending on where we launch, it might take a bit longer. So European market you might have to wait a bit longer, maybe until the year 24, but actually not that far away. So just a few more years.
Well, will you promise to if we can bring you over next year to MTAC Europe in Belfast, will you promise to bring some samples with you?
I would be delighted to do so.
Okay, just the last question. You told me previously you're a flexitarian, but I get this feeling that people like yourself that are passionate about alternative foods, not only for reasons of tackling global warming, but also for humane reasons. I suspect you don't eat a lot of meat. Am I right? Or when you say you're a flexitarian, you eat a lot of meat? No. No,
hardly ever. And as I mentioned, so over the last couple of really literally 2 years, I think a lot more alternative meat products have found their way into my own fridge. So actually my daughters always ask, like, is this real meat or is that the other meat? So, like, literally with every meal.
Well, look, listen, thank you for being part of MTech Europe. You close us out today. We're very honoured that you were willing to take part. And the next time you come back with MTech Europe, let's do more about food when we're here in the city next year. We love our food. We have to find ways to cut down the agricultural emissions in this country. We haven't really faced up to that, but you've given us an insight, a mirror into tomorrow's world. So, Britta, danke schön. Tschüss.
Thank you so much for
Auf
having me.
Wiedersehen. Thank you. See you next year. Slán.